Hey, what's going on, lads, ladies, and everyone else? Simon here, and just a quick disclaimer before we begin this video. First of all, I'd like to apologize for the terrible lighting in the A-roll here. I'll try to compensate by including more gameplay, which might actually turn out to be an upside, but I simply don't have a way to set up the big lights in order to make this camera angle a well-lit one. And the reason why I'm doing this camera angle is because, well, unlike the previous two episodes of Exploring Greatness, this one is actually scripted. So, what happened here? Well, basically, I finished playing this game a couple of months ago, and I wrote down notes as I was playing it, right? And I decided that even though I prioritize authenticity and, raw, unfiltered impressions in the show, well, it's been a couple of months, so I might have forgotten some key details. And because of that, I decided to just go ahead and read out the script that I wrote as I was actually playing the game, because that's going to be the more authentic version of the events. So I'm fully planning on going back to the normal, unscripted and free-flowy version of the show in the next episode. But if you watch this video through and find out that you actually do prefer this scripted, more organized style, well, let me know down in the comments below that you actually prefer this kind of presentation, and I might figure something out for the next episodes. Alright then, with all that said, thank you so much for sticking through this long-ass intro, and for those of you who didn't and just clicked the chapters, well, you'll never know that I was bullied in middle school for wearing pink. On to the Sea of Stars then! So, a couple of months ago, I was just mindlessly scrolling through YouTube, as one does when they have better things to do, when I stumbled upon a video from a reviewer I used to watch religiously a few years back, titled "Why Sea of Stars Will Be My Game of the Year in 2023. Well, seeing as we have already had Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield this year, well, needless to say, I was intrigued, because, I heard of Sea of Stars before, of course, but I always thought of it as just another pixel art jRPG that are a dime a dozen in the last couple of years, so I didn't pay it no mind. So then, what about this game could have had such an impact on that guy to place it above all of those masterpieces mentioned above? Well, when I clicked on the video, the reviewer started with a disclaimer that yes, he is best friends with one of the game's creators, and yes, he is featured in the game as an NPC, but not to worry, this Game of the Year title has nothing to do with that. And then he proceeded to tell a 12-minute emotional story about how him, the creator of this game, how the previous game helped him overcome depression, how he became best friends with the creator, how this game would have probably never happened without his support, and how touched he is that he's been immortalized as an NPC in this game. Yeah, I have slowly started suspecting that this Game of the Year title might just be a load of bollocks. Call me crazy, but something in my gut was telling me that this review might not be fully objective. Just a hunch. No matter though, I decided not to give up on this game just because of one video and give it a first shot. Partly because I was curious if it's actually any good, but mostly because, hey, it was on Game Pass and I don't currently own a PC or console capable of running Starfield and Baldur's Gate 3 anyway, so I downloaded the game and started playing it. There was just one thing that I realized as soon as I booted the game up. I don't even like jRPGs.
Oh god, this is going to be a slog, isn't it?
As soon as the title screen came up, though, I felt a spark of hope. See, the game's menu is stunningly beautiful, especially with the resolution turned all the way up to 1440p. The pixel art itself is good looking, but it's the lighting that gives this game a cozy, comfortable vibe. Do you know what? Maybe this won't be so bad after all. When you begin the game, you choose between two characters. There's a blue-haired girl armed with a staff and moon magic, as well as a blonde dude armed with a sword and sun magic. I, of course, chose the blue-haired girl because I don't have any self-respect. The adventure begins with a pair of protagonists hiking up a mountain. After a quick conversation, they decide to split up and search for a place to camp. I grab control of the girl and holy shit! You run at a normal pace and this game has jumping in it! My gripe with most jRPGs is that how slow and boring the exploration is, and I'm glad this game is attempting to make that at least a little bit more interesting. Now, the jumping itself isn't anything like in a platformer game. You just walk up to a ledge and press a button prompt for your character to automatically land the jump. But hey, progress! It's only been 27 years since Super Mario RPG came out and showed that you can have engaging traversal in this genre. Give them time! This section serves as a tutorial. I basically just climb a few ledges, battle a couple of monsters, which thankfully happens on the same screen. There don't seem to be any random encounters at all, and I arrive at a dead end. So I sprint back to the blonde lad and sit down at the campfire with him. They begin reminiscing about old times at school, making fun of the headmaster and remembering how much they hated sewing classes. Which gives me hope that this game might have some halfway decent writing, with characters that actually talk like people. But then, just a sentence later, they mention some character, and before you can even have the time to ask who, the game instantly throws you into a childhood flashback. God damn it! So yeah, the two protagonists play in a cave with a friend, they learn magic, but he does not. Then they decide to go into another cave that's like super forbidden, monsters attack them, and before the school's headmaster manages to save them, the third lad gets his eye poked out by a monster. I mean, at least that's a more metal way to accomplish that than running with scissors, I guess. Then the headmaster is like, alright, fine, I'll train you cretins. So they enroll in the academy, but they aren't allowed to see their friend anymore. And then you get a training montage and oh my god, I'm tired already. I need a break. I needed an entire day, but eventually I got over Japanese media always needing to have unnecessary childhood flashbacks, and I was ready to give the game one more shot. And you know what? I'm glad I did! Turns out I saved the game right before another tutorial, which introduces two concepts that make combat massively more engaging. First, if you can time a button press right as your character is about to hit an enemy, they will strike again, dealing more damage. Do the same when an enemy is about to hit you, and you'll block, taking reduced damage. The second, this active turn-based style of combat also applies to magic. Some spells you'll need to charge by holding the attack button and releasing it at the right time to deal more damage. Others, like my favorite Moonerang, shoot out a projectile that bounces off the enemy and comes back to you. If you press the attack button right before you absorb it, you can deflect it instead, sending it back at the enemy. In theory, if your thumb is fast enough, you can do this as long as you want and deal possibly infinite damage. I love that mechanic. My main complaint about most JRPG combat is that it's boring, easy and grindy, but adding those simple action elements makes the game several orders of magnitude more engaging. Again, shout out to Super Mario RPG for introducing that concept nearly 30 years ago. I'm glad other developers are finally learning. God damn it, my monkey brain got the dopamine and I'm starting to like this game. Okay, so after that, we finish our training and head into the cave where the other guy got his eyes poked out. Now, ready to fight the monsters. The combat does feel fun, and exploring the cave, while linear, is engaging enough. You have to climb, jump, and flip switches to unlock new paths to progress through. It's all done with simple button prompts. There's no way to say fail a jump, but it does add some much needed flair to what's usually the most boring part of a JRPG. As we get into our first boss fight against a giant tardigrade, I noticed two things. Yes, the combat is really fun and engaging, but also the game does not show you how much HP your enemies have left, for some godforsaken reason. This was already annoying with normal enemies, but it's truly tedious when it comes to boss fights, as the tardigrade has a seemingly giant HP bar that you can't see, so you have no idea how much longer the fight is going to take. It makes for some really dumb decision you have to make, like using a healing item right when the boss was one hit away from dying. And the worst part is, the game knows this mechanic is stupid, because soon after the boss fight, you'll find an equipable item that does let you see the health bars of all your enemies, except bosses! Why? This is where you need that information the most! Knowing how much HP your enemies have left in a turn-based game is not the power-up that the game's developers seem to think it is. It's a basic mechanic that should be accessible from the start. Boneheaded, archaic decisions like this are one of the reasons I don't enjoy most jRPGs. And it's even worse here, as they have already designed HP bars for enemies in this game, but chose to lock them behind an item that doesn't even work on bosses. It's like they hate the players. Which is weird, because that's the complete opposite vibe of what the rest of the game is going for. In general, Sea of Stars seems like a very sweet, positive game, and despite a few gripes that I'll mention later, I do enjoy the world building here. The vibe seems very pleasant and joyful. Anyway, as we fight our way out of the cave, we catch back up to where the flashback abruptly cut us off after the first 10 minutes of the game, so I'll stop spoiling the story from now on. Aside from mentioning that Garl, the guy who got his eye poked out, does quickly join our party as a warrior cook. Okay. So far, about 4.5 hours in, I like Garl. He's basically a parody of the overly optimistic RPG protagonist who's friends with everyone trope. And as we go through the game, there are many situations where we're supposed to fight someone, or just fought someone, and Garl, seemingly oblivious to any danger, starts bantering the enemies and befriends them. He's basically like a charisma max Baldur's Gate character, and I love that. Which also throws a little shade onto the two main protagonists, Zale and Valia, who seem to indeed be stuck in Garl's shadow. See, if Garl is a parody of the overly optimistic RPG protagonist trope, well, the other two characters are that trope, which wouldn't bother me that much if Garl wasn't the same person turned up to 11. See, judging by the character's art and sprites, I expected Valier to be quite moody and brash, while Zale would be more on the arrogant side, making for character flaws that they'd have to work through along the way. But nope. So far, they're both basically the same generic good person from the start, and there does not seem to be much in the way of character development happening so far, which I feel is a missed opportunity. Anyway, let's continue talking about the mechanics, and I'll let you know if anything changes about the characters later. So by this time I have leveled up a few times, and just like combat and exploration, the devs have decided to make this process at least a tiny bit more engaging as well. So aside from the mandatory in jRPG increase to every stat, you also get presented with 4 stats you can get additional points into. I like the fact that it gives you at least a tiny bit of freedom in customizing your characters. So I decided to make Valia into a bruiser, focusing on physical damage, Zale into an AoE mage, and Garl into a tank and healer. There doesn't seem to be much build variety to fully lean into any of those identities, but at least picking up those additional stats makes me able to somewhat accomplish that. And since we're on the topic of progression, the second way RPG characters grow in strength is through finding better equipment. And that system is also here, but well, it's executed in the most boring way imaginable. We do find better weapons and armor as we progress in the game, but they're literally just stat increases. No special effects, no nothing, just more stats. Boring. The worst part is, that's fine. That's how it worked in most of my favorite RPGs like Gothic and Fable. The armor only added defense and nothing else, but in Sea of Stars, the different sets of armor don't even change your character's appearance, which to me, it just seems like the bare minimum. When I found the pirate armor in a port town, I was kinda excited to see how Zale and Valir will look in it, and well, they don't look any different. That was disappointing. It's not 1999 anymore, we don't have sprite limits to worry about. Not including something as basic as that just feels lazy. To be fair to the game, each character does have 3 trinket slots, and these trinkets can be a little more interesting than the basic armor. So far, most of them are also just simple stat increases, but I did found the aforementioned one which shows the enemy's HP bars, as well as one that heals the wearer for a percentage of the physical damage they deal. And I really hope there's more of this later. Because at this point it feels to me as if Sea of Stars is trying really hard to be a really good game, but it's doing so from the confines of an old school jRPG. It fixes so many things that usually bother me about the genre, but it does still have many of the head scratches. And another one of those is the linearity. Sea of Stars feels like a very on-rails experience. The maps always have one clear path forward, and of course, there is some light exploration, but in the end, you will have to approach each problem in the way the developers intended. This applies to the story as well, with one character you meet breaking the fourth wall by saying something along the lines of, well, in the end, you'll still have to do our quest to proceed, so rejecting it is kinda pointless. And while that's funny, it feels ironic to a fan of Western RPGs like me because, well, to me, RPGs like Dragon Age, Baldur's Gate, and Fallout are all about player choice. Oh well, at least I'm still enjoying myself. For all my criticisms, don't think for a second that I am not enjoying my experience with Sea of Stars so far. In fact, I'm having a blast. The combat system becomes really good later in the game as more options open up to the player. Around 7 hours in, I met a new companion who totally isn't another character in disguise, and fighting using this one is definitely my favorite. She's an assassin with massive single target damage, poison, and the ability to interrupt enemies' actions. I love how distinct the characters all feel in combat. This new companion, Serai, is fast and deadly against strong enemies, but weak against crowds. Zale is an AoE machine, but has some really high mana costs. Valia is quite balanced between single target and AoE damage, but doesn't really excel at either. And Garl, well, while he's tanky and hits like a truck and provides healing, he does not have any magic damage. Couple all of this with the action press system and combat becomes really fun as you have to think on the fly but are also rewarded for quick reflexes. Exploration also only gets better as the game goes on. Throughout my adventure, I unlocked a gauntlet that allows me to blow a strong wind that can move rafts or stone blocks, as well as a grappling hook that allows me to access previously inaccessible places. Couple of those mechanics together and you get lots of fun puzzles in the style of the older 2D Zelda games, which keeps the game fresh. Another thing that prevents it from getting stale are the minigames. There's a simple fishing minigame and an even simpler cooking system, but my favorite by far is Wheels. Wheels is a board game in which both of the players have 2 figurines and a castle. The goal is to deal enough damage to the opponent's castle to destroy it. To do that, you'll need to spin a wheel, which can contain squares, which charge your left figure, stars, which charge your right figure, and hammers, which build up your defenses. You can spin the wheel 3 times between each action phase, and after each spin, you get to decide which tiles you want to keep and which ones you want to spin around in hopes of getting something better. This minigame is amazing! The matches are challenging, but fun. For each victory, you get a small reward, and you never really lose anything when defeated, so there is no risk to engaging with the game at all. It's simply lovely stuff. It isn't quite Gwent, but it is a fantastic time sink nonetheless. Speaking of sinking time, while writing this script, I've spent about 14 hours in this game in the span of just 5 days, which is way more than I'd usually do when completing something. With most games, I can play for an hour or 2 and then just move on to something else, but Sea of Stars manages to be one of the few that defy this trend. One Wednesday, I was kinda sick, so I dedicated the entire day to digging out in games and ended up spending 1 hour playing Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, 2 hours playing Super Mario Bros. 2, and a whopping 7 hours playing Sea of Stars. while that certainly was too much and nearly burnt me out on wanting to play the game the next day, it is still incredibly impressive that it even kept my attention for this long. And I'm glad to say the game only gets better from there. Combat becomes more and more freeform as you level up, unlock new spells, another new companion joins you, and some characters even learn powerful ultimate abilities that slowly charge up over the course of battle. You can only have 3 characters active on the battlefield, but you are able to swap them out for another one mid-combat at no cost whatsoever, which is really nice. Thanks to all this, it never feels like there is one correct solution in any combat encounter. Take healing, for example. Garl has a strong single target heal, Zale has one that's weaker but costs less mana, Valie has an ability that shields all allies while also giving them a weak heal, another companion has a medium AoE heal, and Zale and Valie can cast an even stronger AoE heal, but that uses up combo points that might be better spent on doing damage. There's also food. My point is, you've got options, and that's great. You can use any of them in a pinch, but thinking of the most optimal heal to use at any given moment is simply so much fun. I am actually surprised by how much I like this combat, seeing as jRPGs aren't really my thing. So much so that while I get annoyed at the need to grind in other jRPGs, here, in a game that requires absolutely zero grinding to complete, I often actively go back to previously visited areas just to find some respawned enemies and earn that little extra bit of XP that might make things easier going forward. Ah yes, going back to previously visited areas. See, around halfway through the game, as you are about to complete the first major task that the whole game has been building up to before this point, let's just say something unexpected happens, which makes this task laid out before you seem almost impossible. I mean, I knew that some twist was coming as I was only 14 hours in and getting ready to fight what seemed like the final boss, but the execution of that twist was interesting enough to the point where I actually got attached to the raised stakes. I did not predict what happened, which is a good sign for the storytelling, as I usually see plot twists coming from a mile away. Anyway, following the disastrous events that occur halfway through the game, one of the towns you visited before is destroyed. A few of the residents decide to stay behind and repair their home, but most want to leave and start anew somewhere else. By deciding to help them, not only do you found your own town, but you also get access to a ship, allowing you to sail wherever you please in the game world. The story is still linear, of course, don't get me wrong, but you do get to revisit locations you've been to before and see the impact you've had on their people. You get rewarded for this backtracking with some additional side quests, and thanks to the power-ups you find in later areas like the grappling hook or the wind gauntlet, access to previously inaccessible collectibles. Chief among those are the rainbow conches, little trinkets that the game keeps sprinkling on you as a reward for exploration. In the second half of the game, you finally get a use for them when you find a trader willing to take them off your hands in exchange for providing actually useful rewards, relics, food recipes, and building plans for your town of Mirth. And Mirth is a great addition to the game. As you arrive there, it's literally an unclaimed island with nothing on it, and not only do you witness firsthand the town being built, you also get to help out by bringing in those building plans and recruiting people to manage said buildings. Without you, the town would be a bit of a shithole, but thanks to your help, they'll quickly get an inn, a shop, a fishing pond, and eventually even a spa. And I like the spa in particular because it requires a fair amount of conches to even obtain the building plans. It requires you to backtrack to one of the earliest towns to find the person who will run it, and costs 250 gold per character to use, which is a lot. But as a reward for all that investment, each character who uses the spa gets a massive increase to one of their stats. I love this as a late game bonus. All in all, being what I estimate to be about 3/4 done with this game, I was genuinely loving my time with it, so much that it might actually be one of the best games I have played recently. This is not the conclusion I expected while starting this video, and I can say right now that I will recommend you to play this game no matter what happens later. And I'm happy to say, as I finished the game, nothing that could impact my conclusion in any negative way did happen. The final stretch was incredibly interesting story-wise and no less engaging combat-wise than the rest of the game. Before we summarize my thoughts, let's do what I usually do and talk about the ports though. The game is available on PC, Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One and Xbox Series X. Unlike some of the older games I cover on this channel, there is no difference at all between the ports. You're getting the same great experience on whichever platform you choose. Personally, I played it on PC because of Game Pass, but I do think that the Switch is also a fantastic place to experience Sea of Stars, and that's what I would go for if I were to choose again. But regardless of whichever port you choose, you'll be getting the same great graphics. And since we're talking about that, let me quickly sing some praises of the game's art style. Sea of Stars uses pixel art combined with modern dynamic lighting. While this is certainly nothing new, with games like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy also being beautiful examples of the style, it is extremely well done. The sprites in this game are very detailed, character animations are lively and expressive, and the backgrounds are often simply breathtaking. There is one scene in particular when you're climbing a tall mountain and you see the horizon slowly expanding behind you, where I just had to pause and take it all in. But even more impressive than the graphics is the sound design. The soundtrack here might just be my favorite in any game ever. It's simply fantastic. Every single track feels completely distinct, matching the vibe of what's currently happening on the screen. Whether you're exploring a jungle, a port town, a haunted mansion, or an alternate post-apocalyptic world, they all sound different, and yet they all feel like parts of a whole. Couple that with separate themes for certain characters, and a truly satisfying sound effects for attacks, blocks and spells. And you just get a sonic masterpiece. There's literally nothing I could possibly complain about on the audio front in Sea of Stars. It is simply immaculate. I do have a few complaints when it comes to the story, and however minor they are, I feel like they are worth mentioning. Remember how I said that I will report back if I notice any character development? Well, in case me not returning to the topic until the very end of the video didn't tell you everything you needed to know, let me state this clearly. The characters here are absolutely shit. There is zero development going on for any of them. The closest we ever get was a scene when Zale realizes he needs to face the darkness within him to unleash his powers. But all this really amounts to is basically him saying, "I realize now, I need to face the darkness within me." And then he kneels down, breathes deeply for 5 seconds, and goes, "Aight, done, let's get this shit over with." Which is somehow even more lame than it would be if the devs didn't even attempt to give him any depth at all. Seriously, the character writing here is so bad that I could describe the first 4 companions using nearly the same exact sentence. Zale is a brave, kind guy who likes doing push-ups. Garl is a brave, kind guy who's very outgoing and loves cooking. Serai is a brave, kind girl who isn't very outgoing and likes sharpening her knives. Valia is a brave, kind girl whom I choose as the main character, so I don't actually know what she likes doing in her free time, but if I were to guess, she probably uses a cloth shopping bag and writes Doctor Who fanfiction on Tumblr. Seriously, any kind of personality these characters seem to have is only here because of the visual artist's hard work saving the writers from complete embarrassment. All you can ever tell about the characters from their actual dialogue is that they're brave, and they're kind, and they care for each other. They're so fucking milquetoast that it makes the protagonist of Pokemon games seem brimming with personality by comparison. And again, I appreciate the game going for a cozy, friendly vibe, but it is not a sin for characters who have some kind of a flaw or anything unique about them, especially since the actual story does allow itself to go to some pretty dark places, so there is no reason for all those characters to be so nauseatingly kind and never disagree with each other or argue about anything at all. Conflict is what drives growth, but for some godforsaken reason, the writers here decided for their characters to be completely perfect human beings from start to finish. This baffles me especially much since the story itself is actually pretty good and it's outright asking for some interpersonal drama. We get a story that contains everything you need in an epic RPG tale about a band of chosen ones who must rise to the occasion and save the world against overwhelming odds. There's the themes of betrayal, loss, grief, hope, hopelessness, picking yourself back up after defeat. All the hallmarks of a great story on paper, and it is thanks to those timeless concepts, as well as the varied locations you'll encounter during your adventure, that you'll want to stick with the game despite the milquetoast characters and lackluster writing. And I'm being pretty vague here on purpose. I don't want to spoil the story, but the tale about stopping an immortal alchemist who's capable of destroying entire worlds on a whim and transforming living beings into disgusting monsters is genuinely gripping and fascinating. I absolutely adore how you'll slowly learn about important locations in this world, events from its past and legendary characters, and then you actually get them to meet in person, but it only happens hours later. So yeah, I don't want you to get my complaints about the writing wrong. The world building and story progression here are excellent. It's only the characters and dialogue that I have a problem with. And as for the gameplay, well, we're right back to excellence here. The game doesn't introduce many new concepts in the second half, either when it comes to combat or exploration, but it does iterate well on what was previously there. The combat becomes more complex and challenging at a perfect pace. New mechanics are introduced slowly, so that you'll have time to internalize each of them before you learn the next one. So even if by the end you'll be managing 6 characters, each with different spells and different kinds of elemental damage on their empowered attacks, you'll be doing time hits for increased damage, timed blocks for reduced damage, and you'll be breaking locks to weaken or cancel enemy spells, you'll be building up the combo bar, you'll be using combos that require 2 characters, you'll be also building up the ultimate bar and using the ultimate abilities. It never for a second feels either overwhelming and confusing, or easy and boring. I'm not usually a fan of turn-based combat systems because they seem to always sway to either of the extremes at some point, but Sea of Stars does a perfect job of never veering too far from the Goldilocks zone in the middle. The same can be said about exploration and puzzles. All the mechanics, jumping, climbing, activating switches, changing the time of day to change energy crystals, using the wind glove to move objects, using the grappling hook to reach otherwise inaccessible places, using the wind glove to spin turbines, piloting the ship, and even, very late in the game, flying, they all get introduced at a perfect pace, keeping traversal fresh and reducing the tedium of backtracking to near zero. And you will likely want to backtrack, because after you finish the game, a mysterious monument opens. And to activate it, you'll need to pretty much 100% the game by fully building up Mirth, collecting all the rainbow conches, becoming a champion of the arena, solving 5 shrines with increasingly difficult puzzles, as well as finding and defeating 3 secret bosses, one of which is actually much harder to defeat than the actual final boss of the game. Doing this is not necessary to finish the game, and the original ending is perfectly satisfying, but should you decide to do all that, you'll be rewarded with an increased challenge, a good few additional hours of content, and a true better ending. This makes the game about the perfect length for me. Long enough to feel worth it paying full price, but not long enough to overstay its welcome. I would say that it will take you around 30 hours to beat the game and about 35 to 38 to achieve the true ending. But, to my surprise, I was having so much fun that I decided to push on even further and fully 100% the game. After reaching the true ending, I had 3 achievements left to go. I wrapped up the ones for catching every kind of fish in the game and cooking every recipe in the game real fast, and using a guide, found the secret location which lets your characters talk to the game's creators for a while, which was a pretty cool Easter egg. And after all that, there was one last challenge left in front of me, which required me to use New Game Plus. See, after you defeat one of the secret bosses, you will unlock a trinket which lowers all of your character's HP by 95%, but only makes them lose 1 HP if you time your blocks correctly. This final achievement requires you to prove your mastery over the game's combat by defeating 10 bosses using it. This seemed like a very hard challenge, but I also didn't want to leave the game with just 1 achievement missing, so I undertook it. And thankfully, the devs here aren't actual sadists and don't disallow the use of other trinkets. I used the one which doubles your health, so it's still a 90% reduction when combining both, of course, but it's a bit easier. And the one which heals you to full after each combat encounter, mainly to reduce the tedium of having to backtrack to campfires after getting low in combat. If you want, you can reduce the difficulty even further, for example activating a 30% chance for your characters to automatically block an incoming attack, but I decided to stick to just the 2 above ones. And surprisingly, I managed to accomplish it rather easily. With the option to fast forward dialogue, prior knowledge of all the puzzles and each enemy's weaknesses, things were going pretty smooth. I was surprised to see how good I got at blocking throughout the game. One of the earlier bosses actually gave me less trouble on this playthrough than the normal one. And when, after 2 sessions, totaling to 4 additional hours, I managed to defeat the leaf monster and heard the achievement pop, I felt accomplished. As well as kind of sad that there's truly nothing more for me to do in a game I enjoyed so much. So let's put a number to this enjoyment. Sea of Stars is by no means a perfect game. It has some archaic mechanics that simply don't belong in a modern game, and the story is incredibly linear. The writing is simply bad on top of all of that. But despite these flaws, I enjoyed my time with Sea of Stars even more than I did with some RPGs that, in theory, fit my taste much better, like The Witcher 3 for example, which was also a great game, but not as great as this one. So, to my surprise, even despite all of the complaints, I'm giving Sea of Stars an incredibly high mark of 9.3 out of 10, placing it just behind Ocarina of Time on my leaderboard. And yes, I do realize that I haven't given any game a score lower than 9 out of 10 yet. But as a counterpoint, this show is meant to explore the best of the best, so the ratings will naturally be a bit high. And Sea of Stars truly deserves this accolade as one of the best new games I've played in years. And just to remind you, this is coming from someone who actively dislikes the jRPG genre. Sea of Stars manages to breathe some much needed fresh air into a genre I haven't enjoyed at all, outside of just 2 games, Chrono Trigger and Pokemon Ruby, both of which I only played as a kid and never actually completed. So it got me thinking, is it jRPGs that are bad? Or is it me who hasn't given them a proper shot? I am pretty sure it's the former, but with Sea of Stars being as good as it is, I decided to give the entire genre a chance yet again. So over the course of the next couple of months, I plan on playing through 3 more. Chrono Trigger, often considered the best jRPG of all time and one I actually enjoyed before. Final Fantasy VII, probably the most popular jRPG ever. And Super Mario RPG, the game which invented Sea of Stars' brilliant combat system. And if you want to see me play through these games, you know what to do. It's subscribe. You got to subscribe. The Mario RPG video should be coming in a couple of weeks, while next week I'll explore another game featuring the Italian plumber. And while you're down there, comment below if you enjoyed this more scripted style of video, or if you prefer the free-flowy approach I took in the Resident Evil video, which will also be on your screen if you missed it, because I'm nice like that. That's all. Why are you still here? I already told you everything I needed to tell you. Just go. I don't know what you should be doing, like, I'm not your mother. You can go play Sea of Stars, I guess. Or watch my Resident Evil video if you don't want to play Sea of Stars. I don't know, man. It's your choice. Just fuck off already, eh? I'm done with this video, for real. Go. Bye-bye.